Hi, this is Ivona, and today we'll be talking about composition in photography, and I will give you 7 tips how to make your photos look better. So the first one is the rule of thirds, which comes first because it's the one that you can actually check whilst taking photos. All you have to do is make sure that you have that turned on in your camera. I think most, even if not all the cameras, have the option to turn it on. You can find it somewhere in your settings. Just look for the grid, the rule of thirds grid, 3x3 grid or something like that. And that will allow you to compose your photos while shooting. The rule of thirds basically means that you have the image divided into 3 parts, and the stronger points, the strongest areas in that photo are where those lines are or where the intersections of those lines are. So by placing your object, your model in one of those lines, you will make sure that it's placed in a really good place in your frame and it will look good in the end. I think the best part is to place all the interesting things either on those lines or somewhere closer to the middle. If placing something outside, you may use in the end a different rule of composition, but you have to be kind of aware that if you don't succeed, that may look a little accidental. The second one is golden ratio, which is quite interesting. While you have your frame, and if the shorter edge is named is A and the longer edge is A plus B, it means that A plus B to A is the same as A to B, which is not important to remember. It's just the only thing that you need to know is just it's very similar to rule of thirds, but the lines are a little closer to the middle of the photo. And if for some reason sometimes rule of thirds does not work with your photo, you may check if the golden ratio is not a better choice. You can find it in Lightroom, and when you're cropping your image, just press O on your keyboard and that will take you through a couple different overlays, and finally you will find the one which is rule of thirds. You will recognize it by the fact that it actually looks a little like the rule of thirds, but it's like the placement of those lines is a little different. The third one is dividing your image into half, which is great for close-up portraits, and it's great because you can place the leading eye of your model in the middle of the photo, and that usually works with my images. I noticed that it's a great tool to make it look like the model was actually staring into the camera with one eye, although the model doesn't have to look in your direction to use that rule. You can also use it to place a horizon in your a landscape photo. I do that sometimes. I find it a little difficult, but it's also possible. The fourth one is the golden spiral. You can see how it's created. It's actually very much connected to the golden ratio. It's just the same rule of creating that spiral, and it really works on some shots, and it creates a very interesting composition. You may try that in your shots. Also try to click O on your keyboard in Lightroom and go to golden spiral. Once you're there, shift click O to change the placement of that golden spiral. At this moment, I would like to tell you about my ebook, Dreamy Childhood Photography, which I created together with Expert Photography. It's a great ebook where you have all the knowledge plus 30 case studies where you can find a photo and you can find all the tips and all the knowledge you have to in order to create a similar one on your own. We also provide cheat sheets for you to recreate my photos with your own children or with your clients' children. So I think it's a great tool to gather all your knowledge and to also have a little fun with your photography. And you will find a link to this ebook in the description box below. Okay, getting back to composition rules, and we have straightening the frame, which it often happens that probably to you, it happens to me, almost everyone, that we have our frames are a little crooked when we take them, just because sometimes we're standing on somewhere outside, we're holding our camera in a funky way, and it happens that we have the frames crooked. I find that using that grid, that 3x3 grid, having that turned on in my camera helps me to create straight frames in the first place. But sometimes if I mess up, I can always straighten up later in post-production. Basically, you want your frames, your static frames, when someone is standing or walking slowly, straight. Then you have your vertical lines actually vertical, and you want to have your horizon actually horizontal. And if you want to create a clear frame where you have both vertical and horizontal lines, especially if you're shooting something flat like a wall or a door or a window, you want to actually stand perpendicular to that window or frame. If you're using a little angle, that may look a little accidental. It's possible to fix it afterwards. So if you already had it a little crooked and you want to straighten it up, of course, first thing you can do, you can, with tilted images that you don't want to have tilted, you can also always use crop tool and straighten it up in Lightroom. But with those frames that are taken with a little angle where they're supposed to be flat, you can go to transform, and I usually click auto, and Lightroom straightens those lines for me pretty good. Okay, the opposite one is the tilt, like they call Dutch tilt, where you actually tilt your photos on purpose, which is great tool to add a little more dynamic to your photo. Right now you can see two frames, one is straight and one is tilted, and you can have to judge for yourself which one looks better in your opinion. I think the one with a little bit of a Dutch tilt looks usually more dynamic, sometimes more interesting. So always keep that in mind, that you can just tilt your photos in order to add a little more movement. But I think that the photo should be dynamic in the first place. If you have someone running, someone riding a bike, someone laughing or jumping, Dutch tilt would be a great choice. With some static portraits, that may look a little naive, so be careful, but just try it for yourself. That may work great and make your boring portrait look more interesting. And the seventh thing I want to talk about is a little more difficult, because I'm thinking about balance in your photos. When you have some elements to place in the frame, just make sure that they don't go, all those elements don't go on one side, because that may look like one side of the frame is a little heavier than the other. Of course, like a blank space also has some kind of weight, and you can actually balance some elements. But if you have like more than one element, like model, and for example there's other things like, I don't know, sun, or like a little like house in the background, and if you place them on one side of the frame, that may look like the one side of your frame is a little heavier than the other, and that may mess up your composition. And lastly, I want to give you an extra tip. Try to zoom out your photo if you're editing, and if you're spending too much time on one image, or if you're just starting to edit, make sure that to zoom out this image from time to time. Just make it very, very small on your screen, or step away from your computer just to see it from a distance, and that way you can actually know if the photo looks good, if the composition is right, if you're seeing the things that are important on that shot. Otherwise, getting too soon to work on details may not have much sense until you make sure that things like exposure, composition, and like those basic things are not covered. I talk about those things on my workshops, which you can find on my website. You have a great workshop which is called Light and Story, where I covered all that stuff, all composition tips, and also color and exposure, and how to make your frames look striking with that first impression. So make sure to go to my website, iwonapodleska.com, and find, for photographers, you will find my tutorials, including my Light and Story workshop, and also you can find some interesting overlays to use with your photos just to add a little more of a touch to your shots. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and like the video. If you have any questions, just comment down below and I will be happy to answer. Bye!